meal was delivered. Can you hear me now? Welcome again. I hope you all had lunch. I had to rush out of the restaurant before my food was ready, so I'll have lunch later. And I'm Matthias, as most of you probably know. I've worked on many things in GNOME over the years, but GTK is my home base, so that'll be the topic of today. And let's get right to it. Here's a quick outline of what I want to present today, quick summary of the happenings over the last year, some outlook at what we're working on currently for GTK 420, and just what's keeping us busy in general. And at the end, I'll want to look out a little further and see what we think the future might hold for GTK. This sounds boring. I think there's an excellent presentation about Python in the other track, so you still have a chance to switch tracks if you go now. If not, I'll get going with the review of the past times, which wasn't really ready to be used for anything serious, but we have a new one now, and I think so far it's working out okay. There's still some problems depending on your graphics driver, but overall the new code is working reasonably well. And as I said, we've been switching out our renderers quite a bit over the 4.x era. I tried to make a timeline of this. It didn't turn out very well. It's not very clear. But when we rushed towards GTK 4.0, we did have two renderers. We had a GL renderer, the original GL renderer that Tim Bedard did a lot of work on back then, and this experimental Vulkan renderer that I've mentioned. And then early in the 4.x phase, in 4.2, I believe, we got a new GL renderer contributed by Christian Hergert, who paid a lot of attention to make a very performant GL renderer. And since we already had a GL renderer, we had to call this NGL. And then we kept going, and in 4.14, we introduced a new framework Benjamin worked on, which he called the GPU renderers, which is basically a unified code base that we use for both GL and for Vulkan. So it's kind of abstracted away a little more. And in 4.14, we brought that in, and we replaced the old GL and Vulkan renderer with new ones that were based on this new code base. And in 4.16, we then switched the default from using GL to using Vulkan. And hopefully things will settle down a little bit, and we will have a little less churn. So although I will talk about more new renderers in a later section of my talk. So we'll see. Moving on to GTK 4.18, as I said, that was the release in March. The big headline feature there was that we have a new Android backend. It's not every day that we introduce new platforms in GTK, so that was a pretty big event. And Florian Singer, who is the force behind this backend, and myself went to LIS in Tirana to give a whole talk about how you can build and try the Android backend and GTK apps on Android. So if you're interested in that, you should probably go and watch that talk online. Another new thing in GTK 4.18 is that we flipped the switch, and we are now using portals by default for things where we have an alternative between a portal and a local GTK implementation. For example, like the file chooser or printing or all those things. For Flatpaks, we have been doing that all along, but in 4.18, we now prefer the portals throughout, regardless whether you're in a Flatpak sandbox or not. And you can still avoid using the portals if there's a good reason for doing so. There's a GTK debug value that you can set in your environment if you really have a good reason not to use portals. There's also a programmatic way to opt out of portals, which we added mainly to avoid silly recursion problems if you're using GTK for implementing a portal backend. You don't want the portal backend to try using portals again, because then you end up in a bad cycle. So the applications that are affected by that, like Nautilus or the GNOME backends for portals, can use that API. One nice advantage of doing portals by default is now that we're almost at the point where we can declare the file chooser to be not our problem as GTK developers. On all other platforms, we use native file choosers, like we have the Windows file chooser, and we have a native macOS file chooser. And on GNOME, we now have the portals as the portal file chooser implementation as the native file chooser. And Nautilus gives us this very nice file chooser that Jakob already showed off in his presentation. So the file chooser is not really a big topic for GTK anymore. I mean, people still file bugs about it, but we can just say, move that to Nautilus because they take care of it now, which is a very nice position for us to be in. Yeah, we also switched to the cursor shape protocol on Wayland, which is, I guess, a continuation of the topic that things are not our problem anymore. So now if people have complaints about blurry cursors or cursors of the wrong size or the wrong cursor for drag and drop interactions, that's now decided on the compositor side. And GTK doesn't have any role in that anymore, at least as long as the compositor supports this protocol. And eventually we'll be able to just stop supporting cursor themes, and we don't have to link against libx cursor or its Wayland reincarnation anymore. Obviously, we still ship a set of fallback cursors as resources, but all the theming is no longer important. We also continued deprecating APIs. We still don't have a clear timeline for when we'll do an API break and do GTK5, but we want to be clear about our plans and our thoughts on which APIs will be going away when we get a chance to do so. First one to mention here is the Broadway backend, which was kind of like a science experiment that escaped from the lab. It had some surprising adoptions maybe in some places, but there's nobody maintaining it really. It doesn't get updates, so we want to get rid of it in GTK5. Then there's the X11 backend, which is a very old part of the GTK code base, has been around since forever, and there's just nobody around anymore to update it and modernize it. If you wanted to keep the X11 backend around for GTK5, you'd probably have to rewrite it from scratch to make it match our other more modern backends. But we don't think that is really necessary, at least for GTK5 applications. We think it's totally fine to rely on Wayland as the protocol of choice. It's a different story for like supporting X11 as part of the desktop. We will probably have to support the X11 protocol via X-Wayland forever. But for GTK, it's just probably not relevant anymore because the apps that will use GTK5 will work perfectly fine using Wayland. Then there's the shortcuts window, which is a widget that was written very quickly over a few days, and it did not work out greatly, I feel, and it hasn't been revised much. So we kind of want to get rid of it, and that's why we deprecated it in 4.18. And during the last few months, or just the last month really, Alice has started to write a replacement and landed that in libadwaita, which I've seen quite a few applications already adopting the new shortcuts dialog here. And so I think you'll have plenty of opportunity to try that out in the next GNOME release. As you can see, I mean, it looks pretty similar to what we had before. It is search-based, and more importantly, it is one of those new adaptive dialogues. So it fits well with what we do for other dialogues in the platform. And so we're quite happy that libadwaita is taking this functionality over. And since I'm already talking about things now that will appear in the next GNOME release, I can just switch to the next section of my presentation and start talking about the things that we've been working on in GTK since the 4.18 release. So that these are things that will appear in the next GNOME release in the fall. First thing to mention here is YUV support. Benjamin has worked quite a bit on improving our texture and memory format support to be able to handle multiplane and formats and YUV data without unnecessary conversions and copies. And Robert Marder, who I'm not sure if he's here, I don't see him right now, has worked quite a bit on this in this general area as well, up and down the stack, all the way from the kernel through GStreamer and into GTK to hopefully make our YUV support a lot more efficient, and we'll have a much better story for video players in GNOME 49. The next thing is something that I kind of roped myself into doing. Early in the cycle, I started to look at what we can do to reduce our reliance on GDK Pixpuff, because it's a not very well maintained image loading framework that is kind of old school. It uses very traditional image loading libraries that produce CVEs to this very day, and so we kind of want to stop depending on it. And when I looked at GTK, I found that one of the places where we have where we still had the most dependency on GDK Pixpuff was for handling symbolic icons. So I looked at what we can do to redo symbolic icons, and I guess there's a bit of a backstory here. That symbolic icons are natively in SVG with a little CSS styling on top, but GTK never had a dependency on librsvg, so we don't really have had proper support for SVG as an image format in GTK for the longest time, for various reasons. librsvg is not a G-object-based library, and it only has a Cairo API for like the loaded image, and it also brings in a Rust dependency nowadays. So we were never quite comfortable just linking against librsvg, and instead we're using on GDK Pixpuff to shield us from that direct dependency. It's a bit maybe of a white lie, because in practice everybody uses SVG, and we very much rely on the ability to load SVG icons. So it is what it is, and I looked at what we can do instead, and I started writing a toy parser. I mean, SVG is a very big format, but what we use in symbolic icons is a tiny subset. So surprisingly, after working on a parser for a day or so, I could handle 99% of the Advaita icons that I came across. So that was much better than I expected, and we decided to keep this toy parser around. So that's now part of our story for symbolic icons, that we parse them ourselves. And one advantage of doing that is that, as I mentioned earlier, librsvg only gives us Cairo essentially as the API, so we get a rendered Cairo surface, which rasterizes the SVG much too early from our perspective. Ideally, what we want is we want to get the path data, like the actual vector data, out of the SVG and translate it into render nodes, because that's our native format, and then we can pass it to our renderer, and it can get rasterized very late when we know exactly at which size we need the image data to be rasterized. And with this toy parser that I wrote, that's what we can do now. We actually get render nodes as the outcome of SVG icons. And here's a quick screenshot of the GTK inspector showing a recording of some window that has an SVG symbolic icon in it. And if you look closely at the tree in the middle, you can actually see that there's what we call fill nodes. Those are the path data that I was talking about, extracted from the SVG and converted into our render node tree, which is exactly what we wanted. So that's great. But it does turn out that our rendering infrastructure for paths is not quite 100% ideal yet, because we are still using, even though we do the rasterization now much later inside our renderer, it is still using Cairo to produce a mask that we then upload into a texture cache. So there's still quite some overhead. We're not doing it on the GPU as ideally we should, but nobody has gotten around to figuring out how to do it yet. So we were a little concerned that now that we are producing a lot more fill nodes and stroke nodes, so we actually have paths show up in our rendering profiles, that we might create a performance problem for ourselves. So what I did after landing this toy parser is I started to implement caching for the rasterized paths, so that we have at least some level of performance there that is adequate for the usually tiny symbolic icons that we have. It is still a problem for cases where you have like a full screen of intricate paths that overlay each other. In that case, performance still tanks, because we are creating a lot of like very big off-screen masks that then get uploaded to the CPU. So for that case, we still need to invest some more work into getting the rendering done on the GPU. But for icons, this is now fine. And so I said that my toy parser could handle 99% of the libadwaita icons, but there's still this 1% that was too complex or had some SVG features in it that my parser didn't know about. So eventually I went back and I did add a librs3g dependency to GTK just to handle that remaining 1%. If my toy parser can't handle it, then we just give up and pass on to librs3g, which is more of a proper SVG parser and can handle much more of the language than I could ever hope to cover. And this was a little complicated because, as I mentioned, librs3g is using Rust nowadays, and on our new Android backend, Android doesn't have out-of-the-box Rust support. It's kind of difficult to build Rust things on Android. If you ask Rust people, they will claim it's just fine. Rust is very portable, but in practice, it's not that easy. So what we did for this is that we made it possible to use a static sub-project of an old branch of librs3g that is still using the C code base. And we'll only use that when we have to, like on Android, for example. On Linux, of course, we'll rely on the shared librs3g that is there, that is modern and cool. And since I was at this, and it turned out to be relatively easy, I then added support for strokes instead of fills. Historically, our support for SVG icons could only do fills instead of strokes. And as I've heard from Jacob on and on, is that stroking is really much nicer than filling. So it turned out to be relatively easy to do once I had in my own parser. So I just added support for stroking. And I also wrote up some documentation about the sub-format of SVG that we use here. So it's a little easier to understand what you can and cannot use. Right, moving on from symbolic icons, we also have done quite a bit of work this cycle on Windows. Benjamin has been spending time on reworking the rendering infrastructure on Windows. The thing that has already landed is support for D3D textures, like native textures. On Linux, we use DMA-buff as the native texture format that we get from the kernel, and we can pass back to the GPU without having to do conversions. And on Windows, there's equivalent things that require us to use D3D APIs, and Benjamin wrote that code. He also changed our Windows rendering to use an API called decomp, which is like the modern Windows composited rendering API. I don't know too much about this. It would be great if Benjamin was here because he could tell you lots of funny stories about how the complicated interactions between those various APIs like decomp, D3D11, D3D12, that you like infer how the organizational structure of the Microsoft engineering teams that worked on these things must have looked like, because you can see which APIs work together and which ones don't, and like so you can kind of figure out which managers got along and which ones didn't. But I'm not good at telling that story, so ask Benjamin. And we also have a new renderer using D3D APIs. That one has not landed yet because we've realized that we really need to run our test suite in CI on Windows to ensure that the new renderer doesn't break and introduce regressions. And making the test suite run on Windows turned out to be quite an ordeal, so we're still not quite at the point where we have it done. And the main stumbling block there is text rendering. It turns out that we get a lot of text failures where like the glyph rendering is subtly different between the different backends, and then you get like fringes that show up in our image comparisons. So getting all that to work is still an ongoing effort, but we still tentatively plan to get the new renderer into the next GTK release. Yeah, we've also done a thing here. We have a new backend for Android now, and on Android, it turns out dynamic loading of code is not easy. Like there's no DLOpen support, so it is much easier for us to. And we did rely on dynamic loading for modules for like the print backends and for like the video, the media backends like the GStreamer code, and also for like input methods to some degree. But what we've done now is we've just changed our build infrastructure to just include those modules that we always want to have available inside the library itself, so we don't have to DLOpen them at runtime. This has the side effect that libgtk now depends on GStreamer and on whatever printing code we use, like caps. But we think that's a trade-off well worth it, because it means that we can basically guarantee that these features will work on different platforms without having to like set the right environment variables so that you find the loadable modules. Just yesterday morning, I was answering somebody's questions in the GTK matrix room where his icons didn't work on macOS, and it turned out that the S3G Pixbuff module wasn't found for whatever reason, right? And these complications we can just avoid by building the modules and including them as part of the library itself. Right. Last thing to mention here is that we also rely on the Wayland text protocol now for supporting things like compose sequences and dead keys and those things that traditionally under X11 would have been handled on the client side, but the Wayland architecture kind of expects the input method handling to be done on the compositor side. So that means GNOME shell talks to IBus, and then the resulting text gets sent to the client via the text protocol. And so far, we were using the text protocol, but we still had all the code on our side to handle compose sequences and basically parse the key event stream ourselves. And we just decided to rely on the text protocol now instead. And you can still, if you have a compositor that happens to not support the text protocol, you can still get back the client-side support if you set the GTK IAM module environment variable to use that other code. But eventually we want to drop it, probably also in GTK 5. But some things have also happened outside of GTK itself. There has been a larger effort. I mentioned that I started my SVG icon investigation as part of trying to figure out how we can reduce our dependency on GTK Pixbuff. And that was triggered by this larger initiative that we have to basically stop using GTK Pixbuff as our primary image loading framework across the desktop, and instead use Glycin, I don't know how you say this really, the new image loading framework that Sophie has written for Loop, which is written in Rust, and it is Glycin, and it is sandboxed, so it's image loaders. I mean, it's in principle, it is still the same approach that GTK Pixbuff has, right? You have a number of loaders for various image formats, and you can extend this by adding more loaders. But in difference to GTK Pixbuff, Glycin runs its loaders out of process and in a sandbox. So it is a lot safer. If something goes wrong while loading some exotic image format, the sandbox will confine whatever damage that code can do to just that sandbox. And it's written in Rust, as I said. That's always a good thing if you're parsing lots of untrusted data from unknown sources. So that's nice. And I should say it's written in Rust, and not just the backends, but also the front ends. But Glycin comes with C APIs, like it has libglycin and libglycin GTK, which provide a nice and easy to use C API. And in particular, libglycin GTK is very nice because it really gives you a GTK texture object with which you can directly use as in your widgets. So yeah, we want to hopefully transition from GTK Pixbuff to Glycin, not just in GTK itself, but in across the desktop. But this porting work obviously will take time, and we are realists enough to know that there will be a long tail of existing applications that will never get ported. Let alone for the complication of using a Rust dependency, but just because there's nobody around to do the work. So we still want to get the benefits of the better isolation of Glycin. So one thing that we've come up with is a GTK Pixbuff loader that just wraps Glycin and basically gives you the data that was loaded by Glycin wrapped in a GTK Pixbuff. That way we can reap all the security benefits of having this better framework without forcing everybody to use the new APIs. I mean, the downside is that you'll still be limited to like the 8-bit sRGB format that GTK Pixbuff forces everything into, but at least it can be more secure. Right. Last thing I wanted to mention here is, and I already alluded to it, Benjamin has done a lot of work on Windows this cycle, and in particular, the text rendering proved to be a sore spot because it, as I mentioned, it breaks our test suite. So we're spending time trying to improve the text rendering on Windows and bring it up to par with what we do on other platforms, so we can run our tests across all those platforms. Right. With that, I'll change gears one more time and talk a bit about looking ahead beyond the next release, further out into the future. To get that out of the way right now, there's still no timeline for GTK 5. A while ago, like 2 years ago, I thought I was kind of itching to get started on that, and I was saying, oh, we should do GTK 5 in a year, but right now, I don't see a clear timeline for that. There's still enough work that the few people working on GTK can do within the confines of GTK 4, so we don't have to rush an API break yet. But still, we have some ideas for things that will eventually require this kind of break, and I wanted to spend a few minutes to go through things that are on that list. First is we want to kind of reorganize a little bit how our modeling works between surfaces and renderers. Currently, the GTK window has a surface and it has a renderer. And when we need to render a frame, the GTK window will pass the render node that it has to its renderer, and that will produce a buffer that gets attached to the surface. And so that's the way things are currently organized. And we hope that we can maybe reshuffle this a little bit so that we make the GTK surface own the renderer, and then we can just have from the GTK side, we'll just attach the render node to the surface, and then the surface can use its own renderer to produce a buffer whenever it needs to, because it needs to refresh the window content. And that's a nicer organization, and it may enable us down the line to maybe move the rendering itself to a separate thread, so we can have only the rendering out of the main thread, and that will be a very nice result. This might still be doable within GTK 4, because while these are technically all API changes, these are not really APIs that are used by applications. So we might get away with doing this. We'll see. Next thing is much harder to do within GTK 4, and that is we really want to kind of improve the way we're handling text in GTK. GTK text view is this very venerable, very old code base that has its own ways of storing text and its own ways of styling text, which is not very well integrated with our modern CSS styling. And we kind of want to move much closer to the way that web browsers handle text by breaking it into widgets, one widget per word, and then do the line breaking as part of the widget layout. And doing that will be very hard unless we basically integrate Pango into GTK and can then rearrange how the layouting code works, at which level we hook into it. And unfortunately, that is very complicated to do because Pango APIs are exposed as part of our GTK APIs in quite a few places. So doing this will probably have to wait until GTK 5. Yeah. Next thing is that we kind of want to get away from general purpose image loading as a responsibility of GTK. Obviously, we always have to be able to load icons from resources, so we can just populate the UI with icons. But if you have some actual image from the user's home directory, we don't know where it came from, and we kind of don't want to be on the hook for having a GTK API that you use to load that. Instead, we really rather have people use frameworks like Clasen or librsvg directly. So that's one direction we want to go in there. And still related to the topic of image content and icons, we see the icon theme API also going away. It's kind of obsolescent. There's lots of complications in the icon theme spec around like sizing and scales and how to do fallback between different icon names. And all of that is not really well aligned with the way applications nowadays use icons. And everybody's using SVG anyway, so all the scaling and sizing stuff is kind of irrelevant. So we think we don't really need this API anymore, and we want to move to a place where applications largely ship their own icons and have a simple way of looking them up. That is all still a little bit work in progress, but that's the general direction we want to go there. But it's not all bad news when it comes to icons. We're not just taking things away, we also do some new things. And I was hoping that this video would play. Unfortunately, it doesn't. Let me see if I can. I wanted to show you some fun things that I demoed to Lapo and Jakob over before lunch, but my video is not playing. Let me see if I can do a very quick live demo of this. All right, so let's see. Yeah, it works. So this is some experiments I did with animated transitions in icons, and I hope that we can introduce some of these things in GNOME 50 or 51. I'm scheming with Jakob and Lapo and all the other designers to make that happen. Try to whet their appetite for this by giving them a little demo before lunch. So hope that works out. And with that, I think I'm at the end of my talk. Just ask, I can repeat it.
There we go. Ha,
Perfect.
smart. You mentioned the librsvg fallback for rendering the icons. If I bring up the inspector, will I tell which code path it went through to show the icon? Just wondering about how I can debug things.
I see, yeah. So we probably can add some debug, some overlay that highlights which icons are rendered as...
Which way?
Which way, yeah. But I think you can probably also infer it already in the inspector. If you look at the render node tree, you can probably see that the icons that are rendered with librsvg will show up as Cairo nodes, whereas the ones that are rendered with my parser will be class nodes.
I'm with that.
Anybody else?
Have you looked at APIs like Swift UI for more declarative?
Not much, no. What I've looked at is particular for these icon things. What we've looked at in the past is like Lottie and what's called After Effects, like some UIs like that. I mean, that's of course a lot more elaborate, but it gives some inspiration for what you could do with paths and wild animations if you want to. But I haven't looked at Swift UI, no.
I think it was last year that the Newton accessibility stuff was merged. Has there been any kind of advancements on that front, or just silent so far?
There's development going on AccessKit, but that's a little like out of the way. Like I don't really follow it. It's happening on GitHub, but you can look there and things are getting written there. You don't get much direct feedback for like the GTK interaction. It would be nice to have some more interactions there with that side.
Okay.
But I mean, work is happening, and I haven't tried it myself, to be honest, on Windows or macOS, so I don't know how well it works in practice. And we haven't quite gotten to the point. I mean, I think Florian started looking at what it would take to use AccessKit on Android. In theory, that should be possible, so that might be nice to hook that up as well.
So Android also uses AccessKit, or AccessKit is compatible with Android? Is that it?
I think there's like an Android backend, or I don't know what kind of abstraction layers they have,
Even
but I
being
think
a
they have
Rust?
support for Android in some form.
Even being a Rust library?
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, it is in theory possible to build things on Rust. It's just much harder. So.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Anyway, I'm not an expert either on AccessKit, nor Rust, nor Android. So like I'm just making things up now.
Anyone else?
Probably a pretty easy question. In GTK, we still use Cairo in some places to draw, for example, the text cursor and the stuff. That's all gonna go away soon-ish, or what's the?
It'll go away if somebody gets around to like working on a replacement.
Okay,
And
so
like,
then
kind of getting rid of Cairo as a for rendering is one of our goals for GTK 5. So we'll eventually have to get around to doing that. But there's still like corner cases, as you mentioned, like the text cursor. And I think for like CSS borders, we also still rely on Cairo. And then there's some uses inside the renderer that I mentioned, like for actually rasterizing the path, we also still rely on Cairo. So there's work to be done there.
okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, then we have a coffee break right now, after which we would have a keynote, so you can get and recharge yourself with some coffee. Yeah.
So, again, for people online, we are going to continue with our main presentation with our keynote speaker for today. His presentation is going to be about cpak, Mirko Brombin.
Hello. Okay, it works this time. Good day to everyone. I hope you are enjoying the first GUADEC in Italy. I think it's the first one, I'm pretty sure about this. Okay, we have 15 minutes to talk about cpak. I'll try to make it really not boring, but I can't promise. My name is Mirko Brombin. I'm a UI UX designer and co-founder of Fabricators. Some of you may already know me for other projects like Botos or VanillaOS and many other stuff because I enjoy my time at my PC. We are going to talk about cpak, which is a new packaging format, and we are starting to cover a lot of stuff in this presentation. Okay, to be honest, I tried this presentation like a lot of time. I really can't get in 15 minutes. I tried all my best, but I think we have a lot of time for questions. So we'll cover what is cpak, why we are creating another packaging format, what's the vision of cpak, what we are targeting with this new packaging format, what is its architecture, how is OCI-compliant, the Open Container Initiative, how does it handle NVIDIA support, how is integrated with the system in a completely transparent level. It's different from Flatpak, Snap, and other things. What are nested cpaks? The ability to run a cpak inside another cpak. We will check it later. The thing that is a single binary, use case, the next step, we have a lot of stuff actually. So let's start with this one. So what is cpak? Let's say that cpak is basically an OCI image. An OCI image, I think a lot of you already know it. It's an image that you can use with Docker, Podman, and stuff like that, with a container engine. cpak try to use that OCI image to get a package. So you can actually create your image as you want using Podman, Docker, everything you like, and just install as a normal package, as a normal software in your computer, server, embedded device, or whatever. And it's really not, we are not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm not trying to make something that I can say, oh, it's really something new. It's basically something on top of what we already know. It's a JSON file, a GitHub repository or a GitLab repository, and an OCI image. That's everything about cpak. So the question will be, why making another packaging format? Because we already have Flatpak, we have Snap, and a lot of new things that nobody just remember. So why creating a new packaging format? Because cpaks try to fit in the space where nobody tried to get in. Basically, let's say we have a device that needs to run an application that only requires access to a graphical session. Why do I have to install the whole Flatpak file system? Sorry. Why do we have to install the whole Flatpak system with dbus and probably a desktop environment, because Flatpak is really tied to a desktop environment, just to run an application that could be around like 50 megabytes, for example, or on a device that doesn't really need, I don't know what happened, but okay. An application that doesn't really need a lot of features that Flatpak can offer, doesn't require a daemon, doesn't require a service. This is where cpaks come in, because cpak is just a small, tiny binary that you can install in your computer, just moving it in your path. Doesn't require dbus, systemd, nothing. It just works everywhere. Let's do a simple comparison. In the table, you can see 5 points, 7 actually, because I changed something. the first thing we see is what I just said. We have no daemon. Snap requires snapd. Flatpak requires dbus and all the XDG portals, so support in the desktop environment to run things inside the application, to reach something in the host. Snap has squash file system and sometimes AppArmor, because AppArmor only works if you enable that support. And actually, I think the only distribution that support it are Manjaro and Ubuntu at this time. Flatpak requires some runtime libraries, bubble wrap, and of course, XDG portals. cpak really doesn't need anything, it just works. You don't need to squash file system, AppArmor, nothing. So if we don't require AppArmor or bubble wrap, how do we get a sandbox? Because I can't really make a new packaging format in the 2025 and say we don't have a sandbox. I don't think it's going well. Snap has AppArmor that, as I say, doesn't work on any distribution. Flatpak has bubble wrap or bwrap. cpak has a built-in system that uses namespace. It's very, very similar to bubble wrap, but it's inside the container. Okay. So what about the target? Why or who is this new packaging format? Snap target Internet of Things with embedded devices, servers, and desktop. Flatpak is just for desktop because it's made for desktop application. I think the maintainers made it very clear in the website, or maybe there is something documentation about this, but it's not made for CLI applications. cpak just works everywhere. You can make things for embedded devices, for servers, or desktop. To be honest, cpak is not really made for desktop, but since it works, it's a feature. So it's like for free. I see, when I made cpak, I was thinking about some of the issues that I see with Snap, Flatpak, and other formats, because I can't really make a new format just ignoring all the rest and doing the same mistake. Snap uses the NVIDIA drivers from the host. Actually, sometimes can use a specific driver, but mainly it uses the one from the host. Flatpak has a specific Flatpak package, so the driver or the NVIDIA driver are packaged as Flatpak version, and you have to install to have two installations of the same driver, one in the host and one in the Flatpak. cpak uses the same of the host. It just detects the NVIDIA installation, find all the libraries, link inside the container, and it just works, which is basically what DistroBox does, and maybe Toolbox, I'm not sure about this. About the distribution, Snap is not decentralized. We only can install Snap from the Snapcart store. Flatpak is not decentralized, but we all install Flatpak from FlatHub. I can't think about a new repository. Maybe the GNOME Nightly, but it's another thing. Elementary, right? That's correct. cpak is decentralized by its nature from the start, but it's also Git-based. I will tell you, I will explain this later because it's a bit particular. If some of you know the GNOME language, will find this very familiar. About the duplication, Snap is simply not the duplicator. We have a squash file system that is very tiny and get decompressed on the first run. Flatpak uses OS3, which is very similar to Git and has a strong deduplication. So it's very, you don't get the same files in two Flatpaks. cpak uses two kinds of deduplications. The first one is based on layer because we use OCI image. So if you know how a container image works, you just pull a bunch of layers, like 1, 2, 3 layers. If we already have one of those layers, you are not going to pull in it. Just use the one we already have. The second layer, let's say, the duplication system is based on hard linking. So after pulling of the layers, the system tries to find all the same files in all those layers and hard link them inside a single storage. So if for some reason we have two applications that has two layers that shares like the 90% of the same files, the second kind of the duplication will find them and link and remove the duplicate. So if we are trying to mimic Docker, so why not just using Docker? That's probably the most important question. That's because Docker is another thing. Because cpak is like a package manager, exactly how apt or DNF works, for example. You install a package and you can connect all those packages like dependencies between them. This is something you can't do with Docker. You can if you have an orchestrator to connect all those Docker files, all those Docker images, those containers. So if cpak acts as a true package manager, so since cpak acts as a true package manager and handle all the dependencies, it also has the ability to integrate them in the system. It sounds better in my, it was it was not the right phrase. Okay, I return to my, okay. So what's the big difference between Docker and cpak? The thing that Docker lets you configure everything like an environment, environment variables, configurations, and all the stuff. With cpak, we do it using a permission style, which is very similar to the one using Snap or Flatpak, for example. It's very, very, very similar. And the thing that we automated a lot of stuff that you will do manually using Docker or using Podman. For example, I can imagine an embedded device that requires access to a specific webcam. We can just tell in this manifest, like in Flatpak, for example, that I need this permission, and cpak will just mount that thing, that device, inside the container to make it accessible. So what are the goals of cpak? We are trying to, the first and which is the most important thing of cpak, the most important goal, is to reuse the existing knowledge. I'm not asking anyone to learn something new, like learn a new building system. Like, for example, in Fabricator, we work with a lot of companies. I can't really reach a company and tell them, well, now learn about how to snap your application or how to flatpak your application, because they will tell me, well, you are not even the 5% of the market. I'm not going to learn a new building system just to port my application on Linux. And I think it's a bit far, okay? So I'm not trying to reinvent anything. That's why we use the same knowledge you already know, you already learned for Docker, for Podman. Doesn't really matter how you make your OCI image. We can just use it. The second thing is that you don't require to rewrite anything. I am also the creator of Bottles, which is an application that lets you install Windows software on Linux. And I had to rewrite, when I moved to Flatpak, I had to rewrite a lot of stuff. Maybe because Flatpak was young, maybe because I was not really a good developer at the time, maybe not even now, but I had to rewrite a lot of stuff to implement the XTG portals, to move from an API or an GTCAP API to another API. And I just say, okay, but why do I have to adapt my application for a packaging format? I can understand why. I really understand why a Flatpak is maybe the best format out there for desktop. But again, I can't say to a company, well, now adapt your application to work on Linux. They will say no, just no. The third point is how we integrate having an understandable system level integration. So again, it's simply about portals. Why do I have to adapt my application, and why isn't the package format just doing it for me? Because if I need access to a device, I can just mount that device inside the container. If I need access to a file system, I can just expose that file system to the container. The same can be for drivers and many other things. I can say that there are a lot of security issues with this, but with some development, we can do it correctly. The fourth point is getting a container-like isolation, zero overhead, and specifically, most important, the connection between cpaks. So if I have a cpak that, for example, a cpak for VS Code, I'm doing an example for a GUI application, even if cpak is not made for desktop, mainly for desktop. I have a cpak for VS Code, and VS Code could need the Git binary, could need access to Git. What do I have to do? Implement Git inside the container, inside the same image of the VS Code cpak, or can I get access to a cpak that bundle Git? Maybe the second one is better, because if I use it like Pietro DiCaprio, my friend, has a lot of software, IDEs, JetBrains tools, and stuff like that, I can say here, well, now you get a Git binary inside all your IDEs that works in a different way, which is a different version. No, I just say, well, you have a cpak for your JetBrains thing, one for ZIDE, one for VS Code, and one for Git. And all of them get access to the cpak with Git. So there is the ability to get dependencies, to make dependencies between the cpaks. And the 5th point is the ability to be decentralized, but still discoverable, because I like the thing that the fact that app images are decentralized. You can't get a store with all the app images. So developers can do exactly what they do on Windows, which is terrible, but it's really, really freedom. But I also like that my applications can get installed by everyone without simply find an app image online. Just Googling Google Chrome app image, and maybe it's the current one, I don't know. Well, in this case, we fixed it by using your Git repository, where your source code should live, has the package name. So let's say we have the repository, the application named Pluto, which the repository is Pluto, and the organization named Disney, for example. To install it, just do cpak install github.com/Disney/Pluto. That's everything. And this is exactly what you do with Golang. So how do you make a cpak? There are 4 components. The first one is your Git repository. You already have, this is all about open source, so you should have your source code available on a Git repository. That could be GitHub, could be GitLab, whatever you want. Well, I just support GitLab and GitLab, but maybe in the future other. You just have your repository. So the most in a smart way could be to just put a cpak JSON file inside your GitHub repository, and this cpak JSON file contains all the metadata, like the name, description, and the list of permissions, and finally, the image to use to install your application. And finally, the cpak binary. So when you want to install a cpak, just grab the cpak binary from cpak.it, which is under maintenance, so I think it's not working right now. Download the binary, put in your path, and do cpak install and the name of the repository, github.com/Disney/Pluto, and whatever. But if we are going to use a Git repository, we can do a lot of stuff, because a Git repository has access to releases, commits, branches. So we are using all of them, because I had a problem some time ago where a user had a problem with one of my applications, and I made a fix for it. I said, well, now there is a build inside the pull request, download it and execute the command to install the Flatpak bundle. And he told me, I had a really bad time, because it was hard to explain all of this to a person that does not even know what is GitHub. So what I can do is telling them, well, install the same command you already used to install the application, just append the -commit space and the commit I tell to the user. Or if the change lives in a specific branch on a specific release, just use the -branch or -release flags. This way we can have multiple installation of the same software, but using different version. Of course, cpak is not magic, so if your cpak JSON tell that the cpak image, the OCI image is the latest one, for example, docker.io/whatever, and the latest branch of that image, it's not going to work. So you can't simply change the commit and just pretend that it's downloading the latest image. The developer has to adapt the cpak JSON every time during GitHub action or whatever. I think I'm rushing. Docker style, okay. It doesn't really matter how you make your OCI image. You can use a simple Docker file or container file for those which are using Podman or other systems. Or you can use a transpiler like Vib, like Bluebuild, or other projects. Doesn't really matter. We just need an image hosted somewhere. That could be Docker, that could be GitHub, whatever. What you put inside the cpak JSON file, which is the base key, is just what cpak is trying to install. So doesn't really matter how you make it. As I said, we have access to the NVIDIA host drivers. So if you already installed the NVIDIA drivers in the host, you get access to it. And this is good, actually. So I say that we don't require you to adapt your application to just work with the system to get host access to the different things. This is thanks to two things, mounts and shims. Mounts, let's say, as I already said, we need access to a specific part of the system. Just declare it in the permissions list, and cpak will mount it when spawning the container of the application. If you need access to a specific thing like the bus of the system, the same thing, just enable the permission, and cpak will mount it and make it accessible. So that when your application tries to use xdg run, xdg open, I don't remember the binary name, it will just work simply. But there are also shims. Shims are files that create a bridge between the system, the host system, and the container. It's similar to what we get when using the host spawn system. Host spawn system basically uses the Flatpak portal to spawn command inside the host system. So your Flatpak can simply execute all the commands it wants if it has the permission to use the system. Here we have something similar, but there is like a policy between them. So your application can't simply run all the programs it wants and only all the commands it wants. It can only run the commands that are defined in the policy. That should make it a bit secure compared to the alternatives. And we are using this, even automating it, because if I declare that you can use the git command from the host, for example, and I declare it in the cpak JSON manifest, cpak will create a simple file, which is a shim, inside the container. And when you try to use git, that's not really git. It's a command that runs inside the host cpak and require the system to use that command. We also have the ability to use the nested cpaks. This is about dependencies and add-ons, as I said. Dependencies, so that the example I did with VS Code and Git, but there are also add-ons. For example, when I use AIDE, for example, like VS Code, I could use Golang, I could use Rust, but I'm not going to install all of them because I could install them, I could use them. So we need add-ons, which are dependencies that I could use sometime. If I found it, for example, I installed the cpak of Golang, and then I installed the cpak of VS Code, since Golang was defined as an add-on for the cpak VS Code, it can be used by VS Code. If I don't install Golang, VS Code just works without Golang. As I said, cpak is just one binary. It's a static binary, it's portable, has no dependencies, actually has 2 dependencies, but it's really impossible to not find them in a modern Linux system. Require no systemd services, no dbus, no daemons. It uses Unix sockets for something. When you start a container, it also starts a Unix socket to keep the connection between the cpak binary in the host and the container. This is for the shims, for the connection thing with the host. It works the same on server, desktop, embedded device, on your Raspberry, for example. And here we have some use cases. For embedded device, as I said, like for industrial machines, for factory automation units, for smart kiosk totems, all of them that are defined as embedded devices that require a lightweight environment, usually without a desktop environment, or if they require to show an application graphically, they just use X11 or Wayland, for example. But let's do an example. Here we have a true example, actually, because this was a communication discussion I had with another person. Let's imagine a touchscreen kiosk for public transport. It's a small embedded Linux device that runs a graphical interface to purchase your ticket for the bus. It requires access to a camera, to an NFC card scanning, and simply run the UI, the graphical interface. Why cpak make it easy? cpak provides an environment, very small environment, with a very small footprint when running. And every time in the industrial world, when you want to use an embedded device, you want it to be in the exactly state every time. If I have a problem, I just want to restart the device and get the same experience I just had, maybe without the bug I just had. So with cpak, we can do it. Because every time you run the application, it starts the exactly same image. Sorry. It starts the same image ever. So the fact that usually in the world of industrial machines, we need to develop the thing just one time. I don't have to adapt how my application works or all the things I just said. I just want access to the graphical display server, showing my application, get access to the NFC card reader, and maybe a webcam or something like that. And this is exactly what cpak does. Nothing more, nothing less. The same, it's about server. Server can be, it's a complex target because there are a lot of types of server that could be web server, database server, and a lot of server type. But what make, it's a very, I'm trying to explain it in a good way because I talk with a lot of developers that use server, or IT technicians, and they always tell me, well, I'm not really going to use Docker or Flatpak or Snap because I just want my packaging manager. I want to install Nginx, PHP, FPM, MySQL driver, and that's all. I don't want to put my mind on something that could be different from this. And that's not good. I prefer to use Docker for this scenario, but I can cover it as well because cpak works as a packaging manager. So like if you do, we will do apt install Nginx, PHP, FPM, and MariaDB, for example. You do the same here, cpak install and the same packages. Just they are sandboxes, isolated, but can share the same things. Can share, for example, here we have an example of a reverse proxy, for example, in Nginx, with a PHP application and a database. cpak let you install all those technologies like Nginx, like PHP, for example, and MariaDB, and connect them with a transparent connection. So if you need access to the MariaDB database, the application gets access to it just exposing a permission. It's inside a very small file. You just set the permission, it works, without going to expose a network interface or whatever you have to do with Docker. And it's basically the same. So you can migrate from your classic installation with your Ubuntu and apt to this system without worrying about learning something new, because it's really the same thing, just with the sandbox. Okay, now that I see this slide, I think I'm rushing a lot, but I already said it. The next step for the 2026 are mainly 5 points. The first one is the ability to generate standalone binaries. So there are scenarios when you don't have access to internet and you want to install that cpak inside an embedded device or your computer, for example. Then with cpak, you can use a command to export a binary from the cpak system that has everything inside, has the image, the permission it needs, the cpak binary itself, it just works. Of course, it's not the best thing to do if you want to use the cpak for everything in a server or a desktop, for example. But it works if you have just one application and one embedded device, for example. We want to support new mount types. Now we support a lot of them, but we are not covering all that is already covered by Flatpak and Snap. We want to support multiple runs, so you can spawn, you can start multiple instances of the same application at the same time, maybe with different configurations. You can, actually, in our company, we have a product that we are going to ship with as a cpak, because we have a software that needs to run a lot of time. There are a lot of instances, but they must use a different configuration. The image is exactly the same, but the configuration is different. We can do it with Docker, but we don't want to have all the Docker infrastructure, all the Docker things in a server. So we just use the cpak binary, start multiple instances of the same with just a JSON file, which is different from all of them. We want to allow for signet packages and a trust model. We want to, since it's decentralized, and of course the cpaks already lives inside the same Git repository where your source code is available, we want to try to certify the images. So you can still use the image you want, but if it's certified, when the user installs it, that will be shown clearly in the command line. We also want to create a GUI builder, a graphical interface builder for, let's say, just the flat seal for cpak. That's maybe the best way to explain it. So you can tweak permissions, paths, and all of them. If you want to contribute, it's an open source project, you can reach us on GitHub, see all the issues, try to contribute and help developing. Or testing. Try to build a cpak, test it on something weird, or even just suggest new features. For example, you try to build your application, it doesn't work because we are missing something, just reach us and say, oh, it's not working. Well, I try to fix it. Or you can contribute just sharing. So tell to your friends, your team at work, at your job, or companies that when you listen to someone that tell you, well, I need a way to distribute my application, but I don't want to change how it works. I just want to package the same OCI image I already building because I already building it. Just say cpak it. And now, two things. Or I could be very, very pro at explaining. That is impossible. So there are no questions in this scenario. Or there are a lot of questions because I'm trying on explaining. So, hello.
Hi, thank you for your talk. You mentioned that one of the kind of, not really goals, but side goals is to have desktop apps here. And you mentioned that Flatpak has this dependency on XDG portals that doesn't quite make sense. Now, the reason is that Flatpak has two different permission systems. It has static permissions, which are defined at install time in the app's manifest, and it has dynamic permissions, which are managed by portals. You didn't make any mention of a dynamic permission system. So are all of these permissions defined statically when the container starts, or can they change at runtime?
Correct. Actually, it's correct. Two things. You can define those permissions only as a static permission. So not during, you can't change a permission, for example, when the application is running. But this is because it's not meant to be like that. What I think I said, maybe I was not really clear, is that we support desktop, but it's not really the target. It's, let's say we support desktop as a mistake, okay? Because we support NVIDIA, we have access to X11, Wayland, and all of them. The only thing that was missing was the ability to export a desktop entry. So if someone asks me, how can I package a graphical application for the desktop? I will say 100% siempre in español. Use Flatpak forever. I'm not going to tell you, well, no, now use a cpak because it's better. No, it's simply not better in this scenario. Could be, maybe in the future, could be. I'm not going to tell someone that my product is bad, obvious. But what you said is correct. Absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you.
I was really a pro explaining.
Do you do any dbus mediation, or once you give access to the system bus socket, you get access to any bus name, any object interface?
Good question. Currently, if you ask for dbus, you get dbus. You get the same dbus of the system, and you can do whatever you want. But I'm already working with Luca Di Maio, the creator of DistroBox, to optimize the hrun system, which is what we use to get this bridge between the host and the container. And we are finding a way to get you a granular permission system for that as well. So you can't just get access to the whole dbus. For that special case, there will be, maybe, because we are still working on it, we are finding a way, you get access to a dbus proxy. So that's the answer.
So have you considered using the XDG dbus proxy to do that?
Sorry, I didn't hear.
have you considered using the XDG dbus proxy to do the dbus proxy that you're...
Actually, yes, could be possible. Could be. I tried to understand how they work, okay? There are not really a lot of documentation, maybe because I am a designer, not a developer, and these explain a lot of stuff. But could be maybe in the future. Why I didn't really implement them? Because desktop was not my target. Simply because it was not my target. But maybe in the future could be.
How much are you focusing on security of your cpak product?
Right now, because we are still in a pre-alpha, I just try to not make some obvious error in the security. I can't really say it's the most secure thing in the world right now because it's a pre-alpha, so I'm not focusing on it.
Yeah, because allowing apps to talk to the session bus is a complete sandbox scape, like complete entirely. There you cannot have any kind of security. It's just like using X11. Just like if your app can use X11, it's a complete sandbox scape.
That's
the same for the dbus session. So
it's still a very premature question, let's say.
Yeah.
If you want to keep the discussion or on about this, I will go to create a lot of blog posts and try to get on the social media to push the project. So I like if someone will tell me, okay, now let's talk about security because what you're doing is not really secure, and I will enjoy the discussion.
It would be lovely to talk about that. I'm not the most security-oriented person in this conference, but if you try to add security on top of your system, which is not designed for security, I think you're going to have a really difficult time. Or you may have designed something that is impossible to be made secure.
I can understand it. That's
one
why
of your
I
previous
have,
slides had a row for sandboxing. And like one of the most difficult things in Flatpak, and I'm saying this on the perspective of adding proper accessibility to apps, and accessibility is a pretty big sandbox scape.
I can feel the pain.
It's if you don't have some things, then sandboxing is useless entirely. Like if you have X11, sandbox is useless entirely because your app can control the entire system. It doesn't matter if it has a sandbox. If you don't have dbus proxying, the sandbox is entirely useless.
That's correct. That's why we are working, as I just said, to the debug proxy and probably many other things in the future. About the X11, it's a complex question because X11 is 11, but maybe we are just going to focus on Wayland, maybe. Just to not say, no, I'm not going to say that will be easier this way, but maybe we can just focus on something that is modern at least. So there are, I know what you're saying, it's correct, exactly what I was talking about with the other person. It's just about a premature question, simply.
Okay.
Okay, hi. So one thing that you're saying is that everything is built on OCI. Flatpak also does OCI nowadays.
Wait, I have a problem listening.
Oh, sorry. So Flatpak nowadays also does OCI. So in that sense, like, we are already doing OCI things. What I also noticed is that you didn't really talk about this runtime application split, which is kind of a big part of, I think, what makes Flatpak better than a lot of other solutions, especially like for this desktop use case where we basically just have one runtime, and then every application that you need to install, like on top of that, it's just a few megabytes. Yeah, so from that perspective, I'm not really sure like what cpak actually brings to the table in terms of improvement over the status quo. Currently, even Flatpak, if you're not using OCI and you're using OS3, you get all the deduplication features. And with OCI, you kind of don't currently get them as well. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why FlatHub still is using OS3. There are a bunch of, like, I think, good reasons for the design that we have in Flatpak. And I don't really, I think a lot of them are being thrown overboard with cpak. And I also don't really see how, for a desktop use case, this would be any better or could be any better. Like, I'm not seeing where there's a critical idea where, yeah, it's improving upon like what we have with Flatpak.
I think I got it, but can you make the clear question? Because I think I got it.
The question is like, why should we care over this? Why should we care about cpak when we have Flatpak currently, and if we could just improve upon Flatpak? Like, why should we care, basically? Like, what's the pitch here for us as desktop like people?
I think the answer is still the same. So we are not really trying to replace the role of Flatpak and Snap on desktop. Okay. Could be possible just because some application in the industrial world require access to a graphical session. So this is because we have the desktop thing in the presentation. That's about it. We are not going to write in the documentation, okay, you want to bundle your desktop application, just use cpak. No, we are probably put a notice showing, okay, now use Flatpak because it's the correct target. Okay, because you can also use, actually you could use Flatpak to host, to package a CLI application. Could be possible. You still need access to the bus. It's really tied to a desktop environment, but it's possible. So maybe it's just not the role of Flatpak. And it's the same here. You can, because we have all the features to do it, but it's not really the role of cpak. Actually, Flatpak has support. You mentioned something about OCI. Okay. That was because cpak is a really old project that I was writing a lot of time ago. And just it was not a thing at the time. That's all.
How old is this project then? How old is cpak then?
It's more like 10 years now. It was really different at the time. It was a bash script, for example.
Okay, so the next question is kind of the whole idea about, what did you call it, hrun? Or like this, the wrapper executables inside the sandbox. I didn't quite understand like the whole concept, I guess. What was it called? Which one?
I'm sorry, we're a bit late on schedule. I have to interrupt you. I'm really sorry. I ask you a big applause for Mirko because this is also his first public speaking. So
if it was not really clear.
Thank you, everyone. We need 2-3 minutes to set up the panel. We have to organize a moment. If you want to take a little break while we organize, or you can stay here, no problem at all. I hope to see again the room fully packed for the panel. So don't go away, please. Thank you. Hello. Thank you, everyone, for not simply disappearing. I appreciate that. Let me just be sure we are streaming. Looks like someone say hello on the chat, so someone else will see someone wrote hello in the chat. Thank you for joining this session. It's something different. I'm your moderator for today. I'm Pietro Di Caprio. Maybe one of you already met me. I'm going to ask some questions related to GNOME and the open source and our community and ecosystem to those ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to open all your microphones, so one by one, starting from that side. You can present yourself, say something about you, who you are, what you do, why you are here, other than being forced by me. Please, Federico.
Hi, thank you. I'm Federico Mena.
Please, more direct to the microphone, please.
Better?
Yeah, okay, thanks.
I'm Federico Mena. I'm one of the founders of the GNOME project from 1996. Announcement was 97. We started it in 96.
Looks like you don't want to remember the exact year.
Pardon me?
Looks like you don't want to remember the exact year.
It's close to the year I dropped out of college because I was working on GNOME in the computer lab instead of attending class. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I've been working on GNOME forever. I'm in the middle of my board term, and I'm chairing the Code of Conduct Committee. So, really happy to be here. I'm giving a talk tomorrow, and then you'll see a talk on Saturday.
So, please, we have fun there. Please, an applause. He preferred to run a no-profit organization and a community of folks instead of completing the college.
Yeah.
You understand how we are as people, you know? Thank you, Federico. Next one, please.
I'm Maria, a community member, new board director, press from that right now. And community member, I don't want to remember how many years, so but a long time.
Hi, I'm Rosanna Yoon. I am not the oldest person on this panel. Thanks, Federico. My first contribution was in '98, January, so it's been a while. I've been working at GNOME since 2006. Thank you.
I am, I'm Emanuele Bassi. I have been working on GNOME 2003, yeah. And I mainly work on the software development platform, so like glib, GTK, everything that usually you curse because it doesn't work exactly as you thought you should. So I'm also one of the people responsible for the failure of the Linux desktop, according to a YouTube commenter, which was very kind to let me know that. So yeah.
Hi everybody, I'm Enrico, and unlike everybody else, I'm not part of the GNOME development, nothing else. I am a PhD student here in this university, and I'm here today as an open source user and in a little part developer and contributor.
Hello everyone, I'm Martín, I'm from Paraguay. I've been contributing to GNOME since 2017, but before that, I've been just, very close to the community. Yeah, I've been all over the place, I guess. Yeah, that's it.
Should I use this?
You can.
Okay. Hi, I'm Steven. I'm the new executive director of the GNOME Foundation as of 2.5 months ago, give or take. Maybe. Don't get too excited too early. I'm also a U from GUADEC. I'm not a GNOME contributor or developer. I have just been using the GNOME desktop for 20 plus years, and I'm really happy to contribute. So that's me.
Thank you. So I will make this one to Federico. Who better of you can tell to those who don't know what is GNOME and why it is so important, and yeah, let's say why it is so important for the software, but not only for the software. So also to all the topics that are around the software.
GNOME started as a sort of counteracting force to the problem of the non-free license that the Qt toolkit had way back in the day. KDE had already been announced. It was a beautiful desktop environment. Everything worked. It was really nice. It looked very much like Windows 95. It was perfect. But it depended on a non-free toolkit, and when Miguel and I asked our friends at Red Hat especially, what do you think? Why don't you guys ship this? And they said, no, we cannot ship that because it's not completely free software. So we started looking at the possibility of replacing Qt with a free version. We decided that cloning APIs is a terrible, time-consuming idea. So instead we said, well, we already have GTK from the GIMP, so how hard can it be to write a desktop, right? And that's how it started.
It has been very easy.
Yeah. Well, no problems along the road at all. We discovered that the important part is not the software itself, but the friendships and the community of people that form around it. Like back then, we already knew a number of people from the GNU project, from the Linux kernel, from the GNU C library, from the various infrastructural projects, and they were very supportive. You know, we had friends in the kernel who helped us deal with file system notifications because the file manager needed them. We had friends in the compiler team who fixed bugs when our more complex application code exposed compiler bugs. So it was very nice to, let's say, take advantage of these friendships that we made on IRC channels back then, just to be able to advance things. And nowadays, you know, there's so much work that has been done by community members, paid employees, on and off contributors, and it's just wonderful to see. You know, there's been so much we have all gotten out of participating in projects like GNOME and any adjacent projects that you can think of. I mean, people have gotten jobs, friendships, marriages, anything you can think of out of this. So that's really good.
Related to this, related to the friendships, the connection, this is for anyone who would like to answer. In practice, what does it mean contributing in projects like GNOME? Not only GNOME, but the kind of project like GNOME.
You want to take that? GNOME Hispano?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, for me, when I started in open source in general, what it mostly attracted me was the ethical content of it. And the freedom that it will give you. So for me, it was more attractive for that. And for example, in the times of GNOME Hispano, when long time ago, in Spain, there was also very controversial decisions about license, like even where you will have to pay certain kind of fines, even to have open source resources. So there was a lot of fight back regarding that. And for me, it was very important to have the freedom of decide what I have in my computer, the freedom of feel safe with my computer, which nowadays is, again, very important to feel safe on what you have in your computer, because it can get, again, be dangerous. But I think nowadays, more than ever, this discussion is important, the ethical and the safety and the freedom of what we have in our computer. So that's something that, for me, it links me to the open source communities, a part of friendships, marriages, and things like that.
So can I resume it in freedom and control?
Yes.
Those two words summarize.
Control on what you have, not control over other people.
Thank you.
Just explain.
Thank you for the clarification. And in your opinion, this is again for whoever wants to answer, in your opinion, what's the most important value of the open source model today? So it started somehow times ago when you joined this world, but things changes time to time. So if you want to tell someone the value for today, to make them join today, what's your opinion about that? What's the most value? Emanuele, Rosanna?
Is it in general in open source or specifically?
In general in open source, not specific to GNOME. Well, if you want, you can
frame it. Yeah, I mean, let's give it a try. So at least in general, for open source in general, I think it's just a matter of equality and access to, tools, right?
Sorry, a little bit more.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think that the things that we're building have a real impact in the world.
Okay.
And it makes a difference in millions of lives all over the world. So I think that's probably some of the most important things we do. I mean, we all love to, hack for technical projects and, technical challenge and prove ourselves that we are like great programmers. But when those things like go outside in the world and impact people's life by becoming real tools in regular day-to-day life, then, I think that's really important.
And how can someone without technical skills contribute to GNOME or generally open source projects and this kind of community? So who doesn't know how to write code? Because we always, also in the conference, we talk a lot of code, of releases,
yes.
But there is many more than that, correct?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, like, writing code is like a tiny piece of the whole puzzle, right? Like, getting these tools to be usable, they need design, they need translation, they need so many other things that, there's no single person that can do everything, right? So that it's, yeah, like you say, like we need a lot of different, skill sets, right? Communication, like even, organizing the events, organizing people. There's so many different skills that are required for projects to be successful and to be used and to get to people. Right?
There's probably also, it's funny because I think to your original question, to bastardize it a bit, the importance of free software and open source hasn't really changed in 25 years. I would almost say it's the reverse, where it's really easy for people to see the value now. You have YouTubers with 100 million followers getting excited about the Linux desktop and self-hosting their things, and it's very cute. The reason that they care is because everything else sucks. And in 1998, it was hard to say, oh, we have a great alternative for you. Like, anybody could run the Linux desktop, anybody can self-host their own things, because you couldn't. But in 2025, you can. We have a perfectly valid alternative to every other platform. And people are excited because they just turn it on and it works. And it's actually kind of a happy time because all the large, like big tech organizations that make proprietary software are making it worse and worse. Every year it gets a little worse, and every year our stuff gets a little better. Our stuff. I'll include myself as a user, but I think that's also, there's also a consumption aspect, which is, yes, you can do I18N, you can run an event, you can do something significant. You can also do something really small, right? You can just run Linux, you can just run GNOME, and you're one tiny contributor into the pool of people that are consuming actually good software. And I think that particularly the people out there on YouTube or wherever, podcasts that are saying like, I switched, and now I run this thing, it works fine. They're doing their bit, right? And I think that that's actually nice. So we've started having conversations with users who want to make donations, and particularly from people in lower economic situations where they can't necessarily afford to give $5 a month or even $3 a month. And the response that I have to them is, if you can't donate, and if you don't have time to write code or be a designer or run an event, just run GNOME. That's a great contribution on its own.
And to speak to that particular part, I think the part about the rest of the companies, the big tech and stuff, making it worse year over year, is that one of the important things is that the free and open source software is that you learn how things work. You don't have to necessarily be like a nerd like I am, where basically you enjoy computers even though they like impose a lot of misery on yourself. But you enjoy the challenge of understanding how things work. And like GNOME and Linux and the free and open source software movement in general allows you to learn how things work in an environment where we are every day more and more removed from how things work. We invented an entire, well, not we, because we kind of like hate it, but the industry invented an entire tech stack and an entire like bubble to remove knowledge and like put it as far away from people as possible in the form of like large language models and things like that, where basically it's just they tell you that it's perfectly fine to treat your computer as a magic black box, because it is. And it's really not. It's not a magic black box. It's technology, it works. It works by people putting in stuff, their biases, their knowledge, their aspirations, and it put out something else. And you can use it to do something. But it's not magic. It's technology, it's science, it's like sociology, it's psychology. It's there. And you have to learn how to use it. Otherwise, you will be just one of the inputs and somebody else will use it for you. And that is the kind of control that you get by learning things. It's a teaching environment.
Thank you, Manuel.
That being said, I mean, I always say anyone who's at one of our conferences or watching one of our conferences is part of our community, right? So everyone's contributing just by being here, and just by watching this, spreading the word, letting people know how awesome GNOME is, because it's awesome, right? And it's all very important. And if you want to continue and contribute in more different ways, any way you can is very helpful. Like, we couldn't run this conference without a whole slew of volunteers doing many, many different things.
So an applause for themselves, I will say.
And I would like to add that, for example, I have been in open source communities. I haven't studied any technical, I don't have any technical background at all. So I started as a volunteer, and then I was for a while in the translation group, and then again volunteer wherever I could. So you don't have to have technical background is always nice to have, but interest on this kind of communities and belonging in these kind of communities, that is not completely linked on being technical.
Mhm.
We need more than just developers doing things that a developer should not be doing. We have such a big group of things, fields that can be being carried, but not technical people who are just interested to become part of our community. And we need to also transmit that kind of message that you don't need to be a developer to be in this room or or being in YouTube watching the streaming. You can belong to this community without being a developer or having a technical background. And that's an important message that we need to share with the rest of the world. I was going to say the world, but
It actually is the world. It's actually the world.
Yeah.
Thank you. And this is a kind of direct question to the executive director that already made some action. I'm going to read it because I don't want to mess it up. You mentioned that non-free software companies are going to make it worse time by time. So what are the most common challenges in keeping an open source project alive in the long term?
That's a good question. I think there are different kinds of free and open source software projects, communities, and they all come with their own challenges. So while I was interviewing for this role, I also kind of on a lark interviewed for like the technical lead for OpenStreetMap. They are very different kind of project. They're much more chaotic. They're much more disorganized. Arguably, GNOME is much more chaotic and disorganized than other free and open source projects out there in the world. Say, maybe Debian. I won't point fingers in certain directions, but I think that each project attracts a certain kind of personality and way of working, style of working. Some projects tend not to be like internationally distributed. GNOME is quite international. So I think that a universal constraint for all free and open source projects that I think is more and more problematic as free and open source wins again, right? So like free and open source software won once on the server. Like it's absolutely not a question that Linux dominates the server, but free and open source software does not dominate the desktop yet. We're growing. And mobile, not at all. And we will get there. And so I think that money, as much as people hate to talk about it, is pretty important because human beings need to eat and they need to sleep somewhere. And so I think that there's a spectrum of how that money comes to the contributors of different projects, how much money comes in, how it's coming in. GNOME is interesting because you have multiple different for-profit entities that contribute a lot by way of their full-time employees. And GNOME as it exists today probably wouldn't exist today if it weren't for those organizations. But you also have Igalia and other consultancies that are kind of, you remember satellites to a degree. They're for-profit, but they aren't for-profit precisely for the purpose of doing GNOME. That's not their product. They sell services. And then you have people who are, I mean, the number of people that I see who I bump into, I hadn't heard their name before, but now I'm trying to introduce myself. And I ask, like, what do you do? Oh, I'm a PhD student. You know, I live over here. And they're online every day. They're contributing every day. And sooner or later, their PhD will be over. And they will need some money to live on. And I think that it's important that we figure out how to connect those dots. That's probably the biggest constraint, because the way that this used to work was people would do a kind of minor social suicide, or like push really hard based on no financial backing. And I mean, the computer's not magical, but I would argue that that situation is kind of magical. I don't know how that ever happened in the late 90s, the early 2000s, when you watch this go on. That was part of my initial interest in it, was how GNOME, Mono, I don't know if Mono is still controversial, but I was excited by Mono because I was excited by .NET. It's like, wow, amazing, Microsoft did this thing. And then you see, oh, these half dozen people over here are also doing the same thing by themselves. Why? How? Like, how are they getting this energy? And GNOME is the same kind of building an entire desktop environment. I think those days are kind of over. I think it's important in 2025 to 2035 for us to figure out revenue models that actually make those people's lives comfortable enough that they can contribute to open source and free software without worrying about where their next meal is coming from.
Thank you. So we're going to talk to something more easier, or maybe the same difficulty, I will say. We had some talk today too, and there is some in the next days. How can we make free software more accessible, technically and socially?
Easier, huh?
Who wants to?
I can...
Emanuele is squeezing his brain. I see.
I mean, one of the things that I ended up inheriting for reasons unknown to most is that is the developer documentation of GNOME, the GNOME platform. I inherited it because nobody else was working on it, and this is usually what happens.
So we have to blame you again when we search for documentation and we don't find it.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
You can blame me for
so you know.
Like 90% of the things that happen in GNOME are my fault, even when I don't do anything about it. Because
well, developers don't like to document. Sorry? Developers don't like to document things.
No. Actually, like developers enjoy documenting things, but it makes sense in their head.
Okay, yes.
Which is
That's totally true.
Which is a problem. Because we cannot ship the head of our developers to other people. We tried. OCI as an extension for that, but you know. So the reason why I started working on the developer documentation is because I wanted to make it more accessible to people. To the people writing it and to the people that were like reading it. Mostly the people that were like, I know it's weird, but it was mostly to the people that were writing it, because otherwise people that wouldn't be able to read it at all. So to make it easier for them to provide this to other people. So that is one of the things that accessibility, like I use the term accessibility in the same way that Steve Yege used to talk about accessibility. So everything that facilitates idea-aware, so anything that is related to like what we think, like humans think, to be able to convey that information to other people. So yes, accessibility in the sense of accessibility is important for like having access to the computer for everyone, but also anything that is related to like an idea is accessibility. It's the twin of usability in that regard. Honestly, I'm making a mess of this argument. Steve Yege's rant on usability and accessibility and security is a great one. You'll find it on some archive because it was on Google+. For those who remember what Google+ was, so it's disappeared from the internet because, of course.
Killed by Google.com.
Yeah. So the important part of accessibility is making sure that what we do as a project is accessible to other people that want to join in with us, not just as contributors, but as plain like users. Even though I don't like the term user, English is such a bad word, such a bad language because it has this. Users are in English are also the people that consume drugs, which is both apt and very bad when you talk about people using your software. But yeah, it's important to give access to people that want to understand, learn, use, but also help other people. Like a lot of people appear in places like the GNOME discourse and the Reddit, like the subreddit for GNOME, or on social media or whatever, and they help each other out. And this is like part of the larger community. The larger GNOME community is people helping other people understand and use their machines and using their devices and their software. And that is like the real accessibility we have to embrace. So like not just making like things accessible to assistive technologies, but also accessible to everyone.
Mm-hmm. But let me add a question about the socially part of my initial question. You mentioned metrics channels, discourse, Reddit. I am going to add Stack Overflow and whatever. GNOME is a large community, as we are mentioning, so it's quite easy to find someone on every platform. What do you suggest for small projects? Because, you know, many small projects start opening all the channels because, well, GNOME has everything, KDE has everything, and so on. But if you're a small team, you will leave questions unanswered. I saw this many times. So what do you suggest to make those information accessible in a quite easy way?
There is no single platform that you can use. I could say some like basic platitude. Go where your consumers are. Go where the people that you're targeting are. So if you're writing something that integrates with, like, I don't know, a social like platform or media stuff, you set up a Discord. Like, I know Discord is not great. It's actually the death of knowledge, but it's where people actually meet up. So maybe it's where you find it. But it's not it's not where you want to be. It's where they are. So you have to follow the people where.
That's a great advice. Thank you.
I would say while you're doing that, be honest with yourself that, like, oh, I made a Discord. It's definitely going away. Like, this isn't a product that's going to exist in 5 or 10 years. So, like, this is just inherently ephemeral.
Oh,
and
yeah,
as long as you're okay with that.
Yeah. That's why it's the death of knowledge. People have been putting a bunch of stuff like, oh, we can upload files to Discord. We can put it, like, make it turn into a wiki, and it's going away. It's always one bad day away, or one bad quarter away from, or bad IPO away from disappearing completely. So you have to have contingencies. If you don't own the platform, and most of the time you don't, because it's complicated to set it up. But if you don't own the platform, then yeah, have contingency in places. Otherwise, you're going to be screwed.
So I'm going to look at you for a reason. This is a decision to take when you start a project, when you develop a project. I believe you already know what I'm going to ask to you. How decisions are made with an open community
in an open source project, in a foundation.
You're asking a GNOME developer how decisions are made? To make decisions? Like, that's news to me.
When is your talk? Tomorrow?
It's tomorrow at 9:40.
So let's do a short answer now.
Yeah.
And the real answer is going to be tomorrow.
The short answer is the people that make the decisions, whoever they are, will appear out of nowhere and will drag the entire project with them.
Okay.
It doesn't last very long because we burn them to a crisp. But while they are here, they usually are able to drag the entire project with them. Yeah, and then they just cinder. Like, either they just burn out and...
But decisions are taken, actually.
Decisions...
Somehow.
Somehow. Somehow it works out. I have 20 years of experience. I have no idea how that happens, but sometimes it happens, yeah.
So tomorrow in your talk, you will explain what you don't know.
I explain what I have observed, and it happens to work for GNOME.
Fantastic. So Emanuele Bassi, tomorrow, 9:40, track 1 here. Thank you. So, to this young guy, but not only, what advice would you give to students or young developers who want to start contributing to GNOME specifically?
I don't really know about GNOME specifically. I mean, I contributed a little bit, but
you can ask for suggestion to your colleagues here. So
okay,
you want to contribute. You are here because you want to contribute, but
I'll bring my experience and then I ask them. But I contributed a little bit by submitting bug reports and little bug fixing. But mostly, I think bug reports are the easiest way you can contribute. You just run GNOME or whatever software, and you find something that isn't working how it should, and you just open an issue, a ticket, and you say, okay, hey guys, I think this isn't working. I may have an idea, and in that specific area there is something broken, but I don't know where to look. And that requires no technical skills, just reporting the issue.
You're correct, but let me highlight something. Enrico explained us exactly what to put in the report. So it's not simple, hey, this is not working, fix it.
Yeah,
those not simply that. So
those exist, yeah.
We see many of these reports.
Yeah.
So I want to highlight, because this is really important. Hey, I saw something that doesn't match my expectation. I was expecting something, but this other thing is happening. I would like to have it fixed, and I would like to contribute in fixing it. And simply sharing the expectation in a clear way, I could say it's already helping. It's already joining the community. Am I right?
I can add a few things. At least for GNOME, I think we have a pretty decent newcomer documentation experience, and
thanks to Emanuela.
Yeah, additionally, there's a lot of people who are willing to help newcomers. Like a lot of developers are almost 24/7 in Matrix, for example, answering questions. But I think if I had to give an advice to a newcomer who wants to start contributing to GNOME, would be of course, there's a very different things that you can do, but I think it's very important to find what motivates you, because that's what will drive you through the process of learning all of these new things that you have to learn to effectively help with the project, right? So I think the documentation, it's fundamentally important. We are lucky to have a great community, right? But it's very important to understand that it's your motivation that is going to drive you through all this learning curve, and finally become one more of the people who help the new one, right?
So what do you suggest to Enrico and Enrico-like people out there? How to, what do you suggest them to start joining GNOME? So file a bug report or?
I mean, we should have a conversation about your experience with GNOME and what are the kind of things that you like or that you would like to see different.
So discuss, join the
have
chat,
conversations,
discuss.
People conversating, talking about like what they enjoy, what they like, and how those things that you are already motivated for can be turned into something, into a contribution, a concrete contribution.
Are you going to do it?
Yeah,
we are next to each other.
We're gonna do it.
So, what was your first experience with open source in general, then with GNOME, and what made you stay in this crazy part of the world?
Okay, that's a nice question. My first ever experience with open source in general, I think it was more than 10 years ago when I was like 10 or 13. And it was my dad, because he was installing this new operating system he found. It was Ubuntu 12, I guess. And that was my very first experience. I don't even know what open source, free software, Linux, Ubuntu, and everything was. I just learned from that in the last 10, 15 years. My first contribution, I think it was, yes, a bug report, and my first active contribution with code was an integration of a smart device I had that was a smart meter that was locked out by the company. They said, okay, our cloud is not available anymore, and your device is useless now. And they said, okay, that's not going to work. So I found ways to reverse engineer it and understand how it worked. It was pretty easy, but the thing I contributed was a component for Home Assistant, which is an open smart home hub. And I wrote a custom component to support the local connection to this smart meter, and that was it. I had one issue.
You are explaining it easy, but knowing what's behind this kind of devices was not that easy.
No.
I will say.
No,
you are explaining it like, oh yeah, I just added 2 rows and it worked, but
that was not easy at all. That was not easy at all, but I had the experience. I worked on other projects.
Am I right if I say that the process you've done is part of the reason you liked what you've done and why you are still in this?
Yeah, I think the community being able to have control on devices you have is the thing that made me stay in the community. I like the ethical aspects of it, the democratization of technology, and providing technology to everyone. So you have an old computer, an old laptop, and you can have it to run Linux. It is 20 years old. It's no problem. You can run Linux on it, and it works. So that brings technology to other people that are not privileged as us, and that means a lot to me. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I will. So this is hard to read for me. I translated it from Italian, so not all the words are mine, I'm sorry. How can open source help build a more equitable digital world? So how can open source contribute in, it's a bit related to what you just said. This is a question for everyone, of course. Open source helps in making technology accessible to also who is not as lucky as us. So generally speaking, how can this be even more stronger as a concept, as a target? Too hard for 5 o'clock in the first day.
I feel like I've been talking too much, but I'll say open source in terms of contributions. There was one story that I heard while I was living in India about a high school kid that was contributing code to a large open source project. Nobody knew how old he was. Nobody knew where he lived. Nobody knew what kind of hardware he had access to. And he was invited to a conference, and he met up with the other contributors. And they were kind of like, wow, we were like, you're so young. Like, how have you been making all these contributions? And you only make your contributions in this one narrow window of time. Why is that? And he goes, oh, well, like, I live basically in one big room, more or less, with all my family, and I don't have a computer, I only have a phone, so I have to hide under the sheets of my bed and make my contributions on the phone for those 4 hours between the time that we go to sleep and the time that the whole family goes to sleep and the time I go to sleep. That is an insane story. I think that it speaks to the fact that anybody can get in there, like anybody can be involved, and the people who are attracted to being involved, I think to Martin's point, you have to want it, right? Like it has to be a thing that you're excited about, and it has to be a thing that you're interested in. You might be interested in maps, you might be interested in crosswords. Not everybody's interested in the same thing. And so somebody's going to come to all the different pieces, and you don't know who they are, and you don't know why they're going to come. And really, it's not any of your business why they come. They come because they come. And as long as they're contributing in a way that everybody is okay with, they adhere to the code of conduct, and they contribute code or other material that you feel is worthwhile. It's, running an event isn't really a material. that they're allowed in. And that's kind of inherently equitable. Like, I think that that's one of the things that originally attracted me to free software, is it has this inherently equitable starting point where a lot of other technology doesn't. But there's also kind of like the user end of that, but I'll shut up after telling that goofy story.
I wanted to tell a couple of stories from Mexico. In terms of how we can use GNOME or open source or open information sharing in general to make things more equitable for the rest of the world. I was talking to, a couple of years ago, I was talking to one person in Mexico who is an activist for the preservation of indigenous languages. And I asked her, hey, do you want to participate, for example, in Outreachy, doing translations of GNOME for the Mije language, which is a language spoken in the mountains of the state of Oaxaca in Mexico? And she's like, well, not really, you know. Not having the software translated to our language is not our biggest problem. So I asked her, what's your biggest problem then? And she's like, our biggest problem is that Microsoft Office, which is the software you use to write everywhere by default, does not consider our language is written using Latin characters, but with the addition of an accent mark. It's not an accent mark. It looks like an accent mark. It looks like an apostrophe, but it's not punctuation. It's called a saltillo, and it's the sound, right? And their language uses that phoneme, so they notate it using that symbol. It's a consonant. And Microsoft Office is programmed to consider it as punctuation. So whenever they are typing and they use, you know, forward word, backward word, it stops at that character in it, and it messes everything up. And I'm like, okay, well, have you heard of LibreOffice? Like, no. She tells me, I am not going to be able to convince all my community to replace their pirated Microsoft Office with this other thing, which has a million usability problems, just because it happens to handle Unicode correctly, okay? So we are thinking in very privileged terms. I can install a Linux box, right? I have all the time in the world to learn how to use it and to find the people on the internet which I can access every day with no problems to ask them about the problems I encounter with this thing. They get hand-me-down computers with pirated software. They have no internet or very, very expensive data plans on their cell phones. How the hell are they going to find a community to help them do this with the software they have? So we cannot help them directly. And we have to think about how to even approach those parts of the population which are not privileged enough to be able to use our software, you know? On the other hand, in my own town, I like going around on my bike. I met some other bicycle activism people. And a couple of them, they do bicycle touring around my town, but they also work in trying to preserve the natural resources in the mountains around my town in terms of forestry. There's a lot of illegal forestry and tree felling, and they want to protect those areas. So they asked me, hey, you're an OpenStreetMap guy. You know about maps and mapping statistics and such. And I'm like, well, more or less, you know, what you need. And they're like, we want you to help us learn these tools to make maps of trees and the natural resources and the forest and everything, to make, to gather data over time to see how deforestation is affecting the mountains over here. So what do we do? What tools can we use? I could help them directly because they are already in contact with that world. They can install GIS tools to make maps and statistics and everything. They know there's a community around that. They have internet all day, no problem. So we can get through to them, right? And we make things more equitable to people who can use our software as tools for their own purposes. Hopefully they are, you know, legitimate purposes for the good, for the general good. And I don't want to devalue these people's efforts by quoting what they said in this TV series Andor. The guy who writes the manifesto for the rebels is like, random acts of insurrection are happening all across the galaxy. And it's like our random acts of insurrection are to provide infrastructure that other people use for their own little acts of insurrection against the big, bad, evil system, which oppresses us in different ways, you know? The indigenous language people are getting their languages erased by government initiative, right? They punish children in schools if they don't speak Spanish. The organized crime takes over forested areas to tear them down to plant avocado trees in Mexico because that's what sells, right? So we help them by building infrastructure that they can actually use. Not to have arguments about Wayland versus Xorg, you know? Not to have arguments about are accent colors valid or not. Those are cosmetic things that we like to nerd about and worry about and you know, have discussions about. But we should be thinking, how does this help other people? That's how we make it more equitable.
Please, Rosanna.
So taking like even one step back from that, everyone like thinks their own experience is average unless shown otherwise. So what's really important is to make sure we communicate with everyone and invite them to the table. We can't write software for people if we don't know what they need. So having communication channels open, teaching them to communicate with us even better so that we can understand where they're coming from and they understand where we're coming from, that is definitely the first step to trying to get a more equitable software, or anything really.
Yeah, I think just to highlight the importance of like outreach programs, for example, like because sometimes they don't know where to find us or even that we exist, right? So we have to go to them.
Correct. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So, from your point of view, what will be the role of traditional desktops like GNOME in a world that is being dominated by web and mobile?
I think, to be honest, that kind of mindset is, from my perspective, a little bit, again, from the developer perspective. For example, in my day job, I'm an administrative, so I don't use web that much. I don't use my phone that much. And I will love to have a desktop that could be used on my day job for regular administration. That also, it needs to be considered that, again, our users are not only developers. Our community is not the community that is here. So we also need to consider that, yes, the world is going towards the web and the app, but in the real world, in the real use, it's not only that. And if we are not considering that we still need to improve our desktop towards regular people, is also important. Not only are we going only to the web and not use our regular desktop anymore, is the perspective of the developer. And we need to consider also there is an outside world.
Well, web still needs desktop. So going fully web, there is some experiment, but going fully web is still not far, but needs some time. But many developers are releasing web versions of the tools. Even Google has their suite fully web. They don't have apps. They have progressive web apps. So you get an app that is a Chrome tab open like a normal app. So what do you think is going to happen to actual desktop?
So the actual question is, who is pushing for that kind of world? The people that really don't want you to own anything. They want you to rent everything. So this is our kind of insurrection against those people. We give you stuff that you own, that you can make your own. So I guess that is our actual role in this ecosystem, is to give you the tools to make stuff happen that you get to like own for you. But it's not like people usually take this and then they think, oh, Linux is about choice. So of course, as the foremost person on this planet that knows that Linux is about choice, the issue here is not that every single thing that we make as free and open source software is owned by the people that use it. But instead is the tools that you can use to make that your own thing are your own to use. They don't depend on me adding stuff, removing things, improving things, or making them worse. You can make them your own. They are yours.
Yeah, but there are many desktop apps that are actually Electron apps. It's JavaScript. for example, for responsivity. It's easier to use a CSS toolkit to make your app resizable and everything squeezes together like magic,
and then
rather than taking GTK and do the exact same thing in the same time with the same effort.
Not the same effort, but probably a lot less. But to be honest with you,
But it depends on your experience, of course. I'm bad in both of the scenarios. So
I mean, if you use Electron, you're probably gonna, and the JavaScript framework of the week probably is going to be a lot easier to set it up than GTK. That is like a non-starter. They are done for that particular reason. They optimize the developer experience for that particular case, right? But my point of contention is that in order to run an Electron application, or more than one Electron application, your machine has to be kind of like not from 10 years ago. Otherwise, you're going to peg all your cores and everything. So it's going to take like a lot of electricity. It's going to warm up your room, which is fine if you're in the winter and you like turn off your eating, but in the summer it's going to be a problem. And the cost of electricity is not like something that you can completely discount. Like, it doesn't grow on trees anymore. So that is part of the efficiency that we can provide as a project. We are more in tune with the not the developer average like machine requirement. We are probably more in tune with something that is a little bit older. Not too much, because otherwise nothing is going to run efficiently at all. But we are like doing that stuff. But in general, I think we are, as like a movement, but also as a project, like specific to GNOME, less focused on how do we make like application developers bang out an application that is fairly inefficient but does the job like a very like quick job in 5 minutes, and then can be thrown away like 6 months down the line because there's a new, more efficient JavaScript framework that uses that makes it more efficient to write an application in 6 minutes instead of 10. That is like chasing a fad.
Right now we have more frameworks than projects, probably.
Yeah. There are more JavaScript frameworks. Like every week something new happens because they're all developers scratching their own itch, right? They're trying to optimize that.
Developers are bad people.
Yeah.
And I say it as a developer, so
we are bad people. That's why we need fewer developers in GNOME. We need more people like Maria, and we need more people that are not developers, that they have more knowledge in other fields. Because otherwise you're asking developers to rule your like day-to-day, and God no. Please don't.
So I do think, I don't think developers are inherently bad people. I do think technologists have a habit of recency bias. So those of us who are old enough to remember Internet Explorer 6 dreamed of this day, right? Like we had Firefox before it was Firefox, and those were running Phoenix nightly builds, fantasizing about a time when we could actually write CSS and it would work. And then there was this kind of like lofty dream of you could have web technologies on the desktop and wow, it would be amazing. And now we're there and everybody hates it. And I think it's important to remember just how valuable some of that stuff has been to the adoption of the Linux desktop. Like if you couldn't run Slack or Discord or VS Code on the Linux desktop, the Linux desktop would not have 5% market share right now. It makes a huge difference. And I don't think you have to fight those things necessarily. I think it's okay to feel in your heart like web technologies are okay, and some people are going to use Google Suite or Google Workspace or whatever they call it this week. And many people are not. Many people are like Maria, they're going to use desktop applications all day, every day. They're not stomping around a different city every week, working out of their phone necessarily. Yes, we should approach mobile and we should approach the fact that a lot of applications are going to move onto the web, but I think that it's wise not to fight a battle you're not going to win, and fighting against web as a technology or fighting against mobile as a destination is silly. So just accept that those things are happening and learn to swim. Oops, sorry, my microphone is jumping.
Thank you very much. This was the last question for today. I hope you enjoyed this session. A big applause to our team. Thank you for accepting this not stressful set of questions. Thank you for being here with us today. I'll see you, every one of you and more, tomorrow for day 2 of GUADEC 2025. Thank you.